Could have been worse.
Hi everyone, I'm Luca and this is the Miniature Bestiary. I stumbled across the last Monster Bash challenge by pure chance. I usually keep my laptop or my smartphone on YouTube while I paint, so I have something to watch in the background. The obscure, dark and mysterious god of the algorithm, sometimes in the past, decided to present me with Laila Mev last Monster Bash video. I was deeply intrigued, so much so that I spent way too much time watching all the creations on the platform related to this peculiar challenge. Artistic challenges are fun. In the last 5 years I took part with varying degrees of success in Inktober, a drawing challenge that takes place in the month of October and that pushes you to draw once a day for the whole month, preferably using ink. When I saw the miscast video for the new Monster Bash challenge, I knew I had to try. Full disclosure, I have never sculpted anything in my life. The closest I got to it was to use roller pins on bases with air drain clay or closing gaps into miniatures using milliput. So if you came here hoping to see amazing sculpting abilities, well, I think you typed Zad von Z wrong. Very, very wrong. I was lucky with my cards. I got a bee stinger, a lot of alien eyes, a gaping mouth, some dangling legs, this strange texture, a crab claw, and this gooey tentacle thing. No modern or sci-fi stuff, which I was terrified of, because you see, in this channel we only do fantasy miniatures. If you watched our previous video, you know that we also use additional rules for our creations. We want to be able to use them in Pathfinder, which means 28mm in scale and possibly featured in one of the bestiaries published by Paizo. Also, we like the creation, or at least the color scheme, to be inspired by the season of the year and to keep things cheap and simple. So, with my cards at hand, I started to browse my bestiaries in search for a suitable beast to create. Fortunately, I didn't have to search for long. All I needed was in the first bestiary published by Paizo. The first idea was a brain collector. It has the right type of eyes, mouth and claws, but it lacked the stinger and, well, everything else. Or I could have done a strange, magically mutated Chull, a classic RPG monster, or a demon like a Glabrezu. Or take the easy route and do a gibbering mouther, a monster so amorphous that could easily hide my complete inexperience. But the monster that intrigued me the most was the Gogiteth. Oh, I'm not actually sure that it's pronounced like that, let's pretend it is. Crab-like claws, lot of mouths, lot of eyes, and spiky bits. And even a tail that resembled a stinger. It's not a stinger, it doesn't have a stinger attack. Let's pretend that it has it, okay? Let's take some artistic liberties. What you gonna do anyway? Call the Monster Bash police? Please don't do that. I have a wife and 2 cats. I started morphing the general shape of the body in tinfoil. Then I tried to emulate the ribcage using some gardening wire. It didn't work, but well, it was worth a try. It was the first time I sculpted something and the second time that I tried to film my creation, and I was so concentrated that I managed to stay out of the frame of the camera for about 90% of the time, at least in this phase. So, I'm sorry if you cannot see precisely what's going on here. Then I covered it all with Das, an air-drying clay, and I put a cocktail stick at the end of the tail to emulate the stinger. For the eyes, I used some small ball bearings that I had lying around, and some small beads from my wife's sewing kit to have some differences in shape and size between the different eyes. I saw that a lot of people use silicone sculpting tools. If I have to sculpt again, I will probably have to invest in those. Then I sculpted the mouth. I did a small ball with dust and used my knife and some other sculpting tool to add some details. I also tried to sculpt some eyelid and teeth with very little success, and after a while I simply gave up. The only part that I am really proud of is the legs. I used these plastic cocktail forks that vaguely resemble a crab claw, and then I used a candle to soften and bend the plastic to shape, using some pliers to get the shape right and to add some texture. This also was a first time for me, and I didn't think about it, but in retrospect I should have worn a mask. I didn't notice any strange smell, but I doubt plastic fumes are good for your health. Wear a mask, guys. While the dust was still reasonably wet, I put the legs in place and left the monster to dry overnight. Next day, using Milliput, a 2-part epoxy clay, I added some details, some rough texture on the back of the tail and more realistic shapes in the underbelly. And the monster was pretty much done. Since the result was, well, less than stellar, I knew that the base should at least be somewhat decent, so to draw away some attention from the bad sculpting above. The rules for the Gogiteth states that it's a large creature, that means a 50mm base. A bit small for the monster I created, a 75mm one would have been perfect, but I prefer to have a rule-compliant mini. To emulate the weird tentacle goo in the card, I thought about gooey blood and organs dripping from one of the monster's victims. A good idea even for the dangling legs. I tried to do that off camera with some hot glue with the intention of replicating it on camera later, but the result was so good that, well, I kept it. No footage of me dripping hot glue on the base, sorry. With the remaining Milliput, I sculpted a very simple stalagmite to help support the beast, which would otherwise have only two small points of contact with the base, and I used a jammed lid of a superglue tube to add another stalagmite. The Gogiteth is an underground beast, so a cavern-inspired base is completely appropriate. I used some of these cork shreds for the rest of the rocks. And since it was an experimental build in a lot of ways, I tried to add some texture using super glue and baking soda, a trick I never did before, and I went way overboard with the baking soda. Everything is a learning experience, I guess. Then, while visiting a friend's house with a garden, I jumped on the occasion to do the priming with a spray can. It's difficult to do in my own house since I don't have any outside space in my apartment. 2 coats of a black primer and a white zenithal on top, for which I promptly forgot to hit the record button on the camera. That wasn't that interesting anyway. The primer revealed some cracks in the dust that I didn't notice before, so I used some spackle to do some final touch-ups. The last element in the cards that I had to include was the dangling legs. For most people this should be easy, just grab your bitbox, grab a couple of legs and go to town. Problem is, I don't really have a bitbox. I 3D print most of my models, and in the spirit of keeping things cheap, I adhere to a strict rule of not buying anything until all of my unpainted models are finished. This means that I don't really have a pile of shame either. All I have is this sad box with half a dozen of failed prints and some rocks for basings. Somehow I managed to scrap together one arm, one hand holding a dagger, and half a leg from some failed prints, and I glued them on the claws of the beast where the blood was dripping below. And then I started painting. First I decided a handful of colors to use. White, grey and black for sure, and then an olive green and this brown that I know it has a hint of blue inside. Then violet, a blood effect from Army Painter, and some bird skin and dark red. All colors that reminded me of autumn. I mixed the bluish brown with white to get this dark eggplant color and painted all the body with it. And then promptly went outside the colors that I choose and did the claws, the stinger and the back with a vibrant yellow that blended on the legs with the original color to get a nice transition. Everything was way too bright than anticipated at this point, but I had an idea to dull it down a bit later. Using the color I already had, I then mixed the brown to base coat the rocks underneath. My intention was to give the base the exact same amount of care that I was giving to the model, since the sculpt was not great. I then painted the eyes yellow, mixing the original one with some white. With glistening blood from Army Painter, I then painted all the bloody details, and with the lighter yellow I used for the eyes, I also gave a quick highlight to the spine, the stinger and the claws. Mixing violet and black, I then got a very dark purple that I used to shade the body, and I quickly painted the dismembered body part with tan and brown. Everything was extremely vibrant at this point, so it was the time to bring in the third experiment of this monster bash: oil washes. I never used them on a model before, only in very simple terrain projects, but I heard that they dull down oversaturated colors very well. I gave the whole model a coat of gloss varnish, mixed a dark brown oil paint with some white spirit, and covered all the mini with his impromptu wash, using a Q-tip imbued with white spirit to remove the washes from the most raised parts. Everything was drilled down way less than I hoped, and the colors were still very saturated. It's not the end of the world anyway. The vibrant colors were kinda growing on me. Maybe this beast uses them to signal that he is very dangerous, as some venomous snakes do. Or maybe the magical underground caves where he originated have mystical yellow glowing crystals that he can hide behind. Then I coated him again, this time with a matte varnish, to dull down the gloss, and proceeded to do some detail works. I used a lot of dry brushing here, using a small flat makeup brush. Light purple for the body, yellow for the claws, and a mix of yellow, tan, grey and green for the rocks below. I was working with more instinct than method. For example, I painted the teeth and the iris at this point, using an off-white and a very bright red respectively. I also used some olive green on the base. The intent was to emulate some musk on the ground, but the green was probably too light and it gave the rock a strange glowy look. So I thought, let's do another experiment. Object source lightning. I already made an accidental faint glow, so I grabbed some very small mushroom, so small that I can't get them in focus, that I had printed for an upcoming project. Subscribe if you want to see it. And I painted their cap green with very sharp fluorescent green highlights. I also painted the stem violet to imply the supernatural nature of these little fluorescent guys. I really like the result. Some other touch-ups here and there, and my little monster was ready. I completed my Monster Bash challenge. I'm not that happy with the result, but I had a lot of fun and experimented many techniques with this build: sculpting, basing, oil washes, OSL, and the non-trivial pressure of having something that resembles a commission and a deadline. I hope that you learned something too, or at least that you had a bit of fun. I will link Miscast channel and the previous Monster Bash playlist in the description. Check them out if you haven't, they are truly great. So this was my entry for this edition of Monster Bash. If you liked this video, you can like, subscribe, comment and stay updated for all our builds.